Yeah, I do. I think for a lot of people who grew up in this generation, we see Ronald Reagan as our beacon, our guiding light. But it was the first time we saw conservatism ushered in, and we saw everything that layered against it. And you're right. I wrote an article this weekend in which I essentially pitted Reagan's America versus Trump's America. And I wanted to look at what 1 year of Trump 2.0 looks, and there's a lot of things that we can get into, and we'll get into this conversation further. But at the heart of it is there are two very different visions. And I think when you look at Trump 2.0, you have to look at two things. You have to look at what Trump has done while in office. And when you look at the policies, they're not Republican. You look at DOGE, for example, could have been something that was a move towards limited government, smaller government, blew up, nothing happened. You can look at tariffs and they're just taxes. You can look at the socialism of Trump accounts. You go policy by policy, and the reality is Trump is not a Republican. But the other side of this is that what Mike Johnson and Republicans in Congress have done has been a complete abandonment of Republican principles as well. And whether it's executive orders or just standing up to right and wrong as far as the authoritarian impulses of Trump, what I've really looked at and what I examined in this article, which you can find on my Substack as well, is just this is a very different, and it's time for Republicans to get back to the party of Reagan, especially if we want to win. But right now, we've just abandoned all principles, and that's an issue for America.
Look, I disagree with much of Ronald Reagan's policy approach. I think it's been pretty well demonstrated at this point, for example, that the Laffer curve is bullshit. Boy, I should do that as a segment on That's Bullshit, right? That you don't actually get more revenue out of tax cuts. Sam Brownback proved that painfully, pretty definitively in his experiment in Kansas. And the list could certainly go on. But I will give Ronald Reagan credit, and by extension, the Republican Party that you grew up in, credit for a certain way of operating, for being able to do business with House Speaker Tip O'Neill, for being able to advance some important pieces of legislation that were bipartisan. For example, the Immigration Act of 1986, which was largely successful and bipartisan. So the way he operated, the way he spoke to the American people, there was a national malaise, as Jimmy Carter observed, that Ronald Reagan helped us to coming out of the Watergate, Vietnam era. And he had moments of genuine eloquence and moral leadership that we benefited from. When the Challenger space shuttle exploded, and he referred in a nationwide primetime address that night to the astronauts walking up to their ship before they slipped the surly bonds of Earth and touched the face of God. I still get choked up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peggy Noonan, for penning those lines. There were moments of genuine leadership that I can admire, and I can understand how, even though many of the policy and philosophical positions that Republicans adopted over the years, Republicans like you, even though they're diametrically opposed to what I believe, I can also respect them.
Right.
Now, there are deep problems there. Ron Contra, for example, Oliver North, not exactly a clean bill of health. However, it all pales in comparison to what has become of the Republican Party, in your words, under Trump, a protection racket for the president, cheering what it should be stopping and excusing what it should be condemning. This is not oversight. It is surrender. And, look, in that vein, just to bring the attention onto myself for a second here.
Look at me. I
think it's a natural segue.
It is.
To what I wrote in Newsweek this week, which is Trump has gone, it's not just that he's gone beyond the pale, beyond what can be tolerated on corruption. It's that he's gone beyond what can be tolerated on mental capacity and cognitive togetherness. He is mentally incapacitated. I think it's beyond doubt. What I wrote up in Newsweek in an article that I also printed on my Substack this week is removing Trump via the 25th Amendment is virtually impossible. But should Democrats push for it anyway? And what I lay out is just how profound his cognitive incapacity, his mental disorder has become. how manifest it's become, how obvious it's become to medical professionals, but really to all of us, anyone who doesn't have MAGA fever. And it sets up this question that's been widespread on the internet this week. Shouldn't we be putting pressure on his cabinet to remove him via the 25th Amendment, Section 4? And what I lay out is that can't happen. It is impossible. It is not practically possible. And if you want to know more, you can look at the article. But the question that I set up is, should Democrats push for it anyway? Because to hold back, even if it's politically smart, even if it's practical, to hold back requires an act of your own mental subversion as much as what you're charging the Republican Party with. It requires us all to accept that the emperor is wearing clothes, to not talk about his insanity, and to just watch it all go by while we bite our tongues. And I'm not sure that that's something that we can morally or politically sustain.
No, yeah, I think you're 100% correct on this. And I think I think this is the value of this show, is we get a chance from two separate perspectives to have these honest, real conversations on things that I think that a lot of Americans are looking out and saying. I read your article. You gave me a preview of this thing before you put it up, and it's excellent. It's an excellent article.
Oh, thank you.
And I think these are conversations that Americans are looking at. Look, I think the reality is Trump has become a joke. He's become a national punchline. The rambling at the White House press briefing, the Davos, even going back to accepting the Nobel Peace Prize, everybody feels like they're just laughing at him. And they're kind of looking at him as the crazy uncle who just says weird stuff. But I think we've moved past that. I think most Americans are now taking a look at this and just saying there's something seriously wrong. I do think we have a problem in America right now on the way we're nominating and bringing people in. We're now in the second aging president where we have questions about their mental health. The biggest problem I think we had with Joe Biden in this is, was he going to fall asleep in meetings? Biggest problem we have with Trump is now, which country is he going to invade? And those are significantly different. And I think that's why there need to be significantly conversations.
That's such a good point, by the way. That's such a good point, because I hear this when I do my live stream. I get mostly trolls and some bots showing up, and their only defense of Trump at this point is, oh, whataboutism. It's what about Biden? It's, yeah, okay, he was sleepy. And you could almost forgive Trump wandering off on the prime minister of Japan, which he did, and going into bizarre rambles about snakes, except they're happening more and more in a context of he's going into this bizarre window gazing episode in the middle of a high-powered, high-stakes White House meeting to decide the future of Venezuela, an entire country, hundreds of billions, millions of lives on the line. This is, again, this can't be sustained. And you're writing about this right now as well.
Well, I am. And look, one more thing on this. What about it? This is what drives me insane. And it could actually be my Trump dump, or it could be a good bullshit segment, is why is that our standard? Why have we accepted that? Like, why in the world is that our answer to it? No, everybody should just be pissed off. And so what I'm writing about this week, because of a lot of the same, and a lot of the same of where you're coming from, and I'm going to bring it back to Reagan. Reagan in 1960 gave a great speech, his entrance into it, called The Time for Choosing. It's the famous rendezvous with destiny line for all of us. And I frame it this week that Republicans, we're facing our own time for choosing right now. Is that we are looking at this. We've been told for so long we have to just accept the nonsense from Trump because he wears the same jersey. But the truth is, that isn't the choice. The choice is that we have to start having a serious conversation about his fitness for office. We have to have these conversations. We owe it to America. And that's how history is going to judge us on this. I asked the question, will Republicans show leadership and take their oath to defend the Constitution seriously? Or will they be remembered as cowards that let, and I quote Reagan again, the greatest nation in the world, the last best hope of man on earth, be diminished and consigned to the ash heap of history? Republicans, and I specifically did not say Republicans in Congress. This is all Republicans. This is because if you want change, you want your member of Congress to listen, I need Republicans to stand up and start to say enough is enough. I need Republicans to say this is not right. This is not who we are. I recognize that if he is removed from office, we at JD Vance. I'm not a fan of JD Vance. Everybody who watches this show knows I am not a fan of JD Vance. But the one thing about JD Vance is I don't think he's in cognitive decline. I think Donald Trump, I think there are some real serious issues, and the decision he makes now could set off problems for generations. And Republicans, we owe it to our country to do this. We owe it to America to have these conversations and to start expressing those concerns out loud in public with our members of Congress so that they can finally grow a backbone and do what's right.
Let's make that the last word on our hot off the presses segment and turn to this week's edition of That's Bullshit.